Welcome to the Be Well at USask podcast. My name is Peter Headley. I serve as the Director of Student Affairs and Services at the university. At this very challenging time, we've created this podcast to connect with you, to share some ideas and information that we hope you'll find helpful. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Jennifer Drennan, the Director of Programs and Operations at the College of Graduate and Post-doctoral Studies, CGPS for short, at the University of Saskatchewan. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges graduate students may be facing in the current situation and the supports and opportunities available to them on and beyond campus. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So can you start off telling me a little about your role and how your team at Grad Studies supports students?
Sure. Well, the College of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies is the academic home for all graduate students on campus, although most of them connect more closely with the departments or the schools where their programs are being delivered. But in my role as Director of Programs and Operations, we kind of oversee the whole student life cycle. And so that includes supporting admissions and then supporting graduate students who need our help all the way through their programs to when they graduate. And some students will get through their whole programs without ever needing us, and some will need us to help them with some kind of issue or challenge or question that comes up during their program, and we're there to help when that happens.
That's great. And so what are you hearing from graduate students right now? Obviously, the current situation is pretty extraordinary for everyone. How are they sharing that this is affecting them and their studies?
Well, it's interesting because there are some commonalities, of course, to how graduate students are experiencing this, and then there are some ways that they're experiencing it very differently. And so I think there are shared anxieties around what's going to happen, around how they can move forward in their studies. For those who are in research programs, how this is going to affect their ability to continue to conduct that important research and to complete their writing. For those who are in course-based programs or who need courses for their programs, they're wondering what it's going to look like in terms of how they're going to take those courses. And of course, a huge uncertainty and concern for most of our students too is finances, whether they're on student loans or research funding, or whether they're employed and that employment is either pulling them away from their studies or that employment is no longer available to them. Financial strain is a concern for everyone right now, and graduate students are no different.
And so what's some of the advice that you would give? And maybe a first question about those graduate students are not in a position at the moment to move forward with their studies. So I guess I'm thinking about them being home with a young family perhaps, or financial issues, or even just not having that study or lab space. What sort of advice would you give, or how can your team help?
Well, I think ideally, our first advice to graduate students is to find ways to move forward and to think creatively. And so, of course, right now, the institution's making a move to remote and online teaching and learning. And so we're encouraging our students where possible to take advantage of that. And, where students were working in labs doing research or doing field work before or had plans to do that, we're encouraging them to work together with the faculty in their academic units and with their supervisors to sort of rethink their approach and think about if there are ways that they can continue to move forward in their research without that traditional lab access or without it looking the way that they expected it to look. Some faculty have transitioned to fully online labs, which is amazing. We're hearing from some faculty and students that, they're rethinking their research and rethinking the data that they needed to be able to move forward and how they could move forward with the data that they already have, or how they could make a shift to collect data in ways that don't require them to be in the lab or the field right now so that they can keep on moving forward. Or in some cases, where that field work or that experiential learning or that lab research where it is absolutely necessary and there's no way to get around it. We're encouraging people to look at, okay, well, what can you do right now? What are ways that, you can shift your attention and move forward right now while we wait for some of that other access to be restored? And people are getting, really creative and innovative in their approaches. And it's a great sort of silver lining to see to all of this. But you did raise an important question as well about, what about those students who are unable to move forward for one reason or another? And, we already gave the example of students who really need that access to a lab or access to an experiential learning or a clinical setting. There's that. But also, outside of academics, students are experiencing a whole host of other situations that could stop them from being able to make progress right now. And so you brought up childcare, for example. Many of us have young children at home who are now either out of care or out of school, and we're trying to balance caring for them and sometimes homeschooling them while we're managing everything else. And grad students are no different. Many of them are parents or caregivers to others as well. Many of our graduate students are employed, and many of them employed in essential services. And so a lot of people right now, their attention is taken away doing extremely important work in essential services somehow. And so, they're in a situation where it's untenable to be able to move forward in their graduate program right now. And while we encourage students to find ways to make progress, we absolutely acknowledge that it's just not going to be possible for some people at the moment. And we want to let them know that there are mechanisms there to accommodate and support those people, and that they can reach out to us if they want more information about those options.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I guess what you don't want is for people not to know and to sit and worry. And to have that unknown about the impact upon their studies or their finances, that they can get in touch with the team. And we'll certainly put the details for the contact to the team in the podcast details. Just in more general terms, are there key messages that you would like to share with graduate studies, given everything that's happening at the moment?
Yeah, I think besides what I've already shared, one of the messages I really want to drive home is to really encourage graduate students to communicate, to communicate with us and with their other contacts at the university. Reach out to if you have a faculty supervisor or a graduate chair or a graduate administrator, who you previously had contact with regularly. Reach out and ask questions, ask for help, ask for resources, tell them what's going on with you. Don't sort of wait or make assumptions about what might or might not be available. Avail yourself of the great advice and the great resources that are being put together to support you, because we really are here to help. And that includes us in the College of Graduate and Post-doctoral Studies. There are tons of resources and student services on campus, and they're all putting out great information right now to help students. But if you find that you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not getting the answers that you need, or you're not quite sure where you should go to get the help that you need, just reach out to us. And if we can't answer your questions, we'll point you to the people who can, or we'll point you to the right resources who are there to support you.
And are there other supports or even opportunities right now that graduate students might not be aware of, that they should be aware of?
Yeah, I think that there are several popping up, and that's one of the encouraging things to see, I think, in response to this whole unprecedented situation, is that there are people who are, rising to the occasion to help and to come up with solutions that provide mutual benefit. And so one example is the Guanama Center for Teaching and Learning. They are facilitating a fund which is in place to hire a bunch of graduate students to be teaching assistants for the transition to remote and online learning, because, of course, for some faculty members, that's going to be a huge shift in how they do things, and they need help and support. And we've got, amazing, talented, tech-savvy graduate students in our graduate student community. And so here's a perfect situation where we can provide some employment to those graduate students, and they in turn can provide help and support for that transition to online and remote learning. So again, it's the Guanama Center for Teaching and Learning who are administrating that, and we will put a link directly to the page that describes that and how to apply in the down bar.
Well, that sounds great. Is there anything else?
Yeah, in addition to, exciting employment opportunities like the one that I just described, we know that there are people who need aid right now, who are in crisis or who need other options for support, and those are available as well. There is crisis financial aid that students can apply for through Student Central, and there's a host of other pieces of aid too that the eligibility criteria varies depending on your own situation. But there's, Saskatchewan Emergency Financial Aid, there's the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and other government support. There are also stays on Canada student loan repayment. There's a variety of options that different people can avail themselves of depending on the eligibility criteria. And there's a fairly comprehensive listing of those actually on the COVID-19 updates page. And we will provide a direct link to that exact money page in the down bar as well.
So one of the things that I'm asking guests on the show, Jen, is around what they're doing every day to be well themselves, or whatever that is for them in terms of their own well-being or connection to others. Are you able to share something that's helping you to stay well day to day right now?
Yeah, I think every day is different. That's probably the same for everyone. Some days you feel like you're handling it better than others. And so the way that I've been approaching it is actually just sort of absorbing moments. And so, whether it's, on the weekend, a moment with my daughter, like this weekend, I was looking out the window and there was a little ground squirrel in our yard. And so we all gathered around the window and watched the squirrel for a few minutes, which sounds really silly, but I just kind of took in that moment. It was very peaceful. All just gathered around the window, and it was kind of just a moment where nothing else was happening. We weren't worrying about anything else. We were just watching nature together. And so that's just an example of just sort of small moments where I'm trying to kind of breathe that moment in and just appreciate it for what it is, knowing that there may also be moments when, I'm feeling stressed out or overwhelmed, and that I can just experience those and work through them as well. And so I think that's something that helps me is when everything's feeling really big and insurmountable, just taking things moment by moment and appreciating the good ones and working through the tougher ones.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of people have been talking about being mindful. And I know a guest I've set up as a colleague of ours, Anita Chakravarti at the university, who's going to come and talk about mindfulness. But I think absolutely, I find my household is very noisy and can be quite stressful in the working day. So for sure, zoning in on a single moment or a single thing, I know can be really helpful. So is there a final thought that you'd want to leave listeners with, whether that's grad students or people who work with grad students?
Oh, there's so much I want to say to people. So I think that, and this might sound a little like self-helpy, but I think what I'd want to say to people is that, we can do this and we can get through this, but that we can be kind to ourselves in the moments, because you might feel in that moment that you just can't do it right now. And that's something I've been trying to, I think that a phrase that we're hearing often is to, be kind to ourselves, be kind to yourself. And I've been trying to really put that into action for myself. And I hope that others are too, where if you're having a moment where you're just feeling overwhelmed and you're trying to give yourself a pep talk and it's just not working, that's okay. Just kind of, give yourself a minute, give yourself a break, and then try again later. And then when you're able to, just not being afraid to reach out and ask for help and avail yourselves of the resources that are available. And I know that I mentioned that before, but it's a message that I really want out there because we just find it so darn hard to ask for help, I think, sometimes, and to reach out when we could use assistance or when we're not sure what to do. And so I really encourage people to do that. We really are here to help. In the College of Graduate and Post-doctoral Studies and other student services on campus, there are people who genuinely want to help everyone work through this. And so don't be afraid to reach out and ask your question or let us know that you need support, and let us do what we can to help you.
That's great. Well, listen, Jen, I know you're busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come and have a chat and share all this important information.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Peter.
Thanks for listening to the Be Well at USask podcast with me, Peter Headley. And thanks again to Jen for joining me and sharing. Students can connect with the CGPS team by phone or email, and the links are listed in the podcast details. Please check in again for future episodes and more content related to USask supports. Subscribe and share this podcast. We're currently on YouTube and Spotify. We'd also love to hear from you. So please post comments and questions, and we'll look to include them in future episodes. Also, if there's a person you'd like to see as a guest or a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Chloe Corcoran from Access and Equity Services at the university. We're going to be talking about supports available to students registered with that office. Until next time, stay safe and be well.